I walked into my father's will reading with a general's stars on my shoulders, and not a single head turned. They looked at me like I was a stranger whispering snide remarks behind my back. I was his daughter, his flesh and blood, but throughout the entire affair, my name wasn't mentioned once. I was ready to walk out, until my father's lawyer stood, opened an old envelope, stared at me for a long moment, and said, "To Major General Hayes with respect." From that moment, my life took a turn down a path I never could have imagined. The father who was absent through my childhood turned out to have lived a secret life. The woman I called my mother wasn't the one who gave birth to me, and the man waiting for me outside the cemetery, Briggs, wasn't just my father's old friend, he was the keeper of every key to the truth. Every word my father left behind was like a piece of a strange puzzle, guiding me through wars, false identities, unkept promises, and a legacy no one dared claim until I realized I wasn't chosen because I was his daughter, but because I was the only one strong enough to bear the full weight of the truth. I walked into that room in my dress uniform medals gleaming, and not one person bothered to look up. I'd walked into rooms before where everyone snapped to attention, from dusty bases in the Middle East to hushed command centers in the Pentagon to solemn ceremonies where the flag was raised to the sound of trumpets. Anywhere I went, heads turned. Not because I'm a woman, but because I'm a United States Army general, and the olive drab on my shoulders stands for honor, discipline, and the blood of countless comrades who never made it home. But here, in the sprawling Maryland estate, where my father once lived, I stepped inside, and everyone stayed seated. No one stood. No one saluted. No one offered me a chair. They knew who I was. They knew I was his eldest daughter. But they acted like I was invisible. It was a crisp fall morning, the sunlight pale and thin. I remember it clearly, my black dress shoes polished the night before, clicked sharply on the hardwood floor. I wore my formal uniform, every medal in place from the Silver Star for Afghanistan to the Distinguished Service Medal. My rank was clear on my shoulders, Major General U.S. Army, but in that room I was a nobody. I recognized most of the faces. My half-brother Mark, a lawyer who favored ash-gray suits. Emily, the youngest, born nearly 20 years after me with her blonde curls and sunglasses perched indoors, like she was some kind of starlet. My father's second wife, the woman my mother once called the interloper, sat by the fireplace clutching a glass of red wine. No one smiled. No one asked how I was. Just a ripple of glances, then eyes averted. I moved deliberately, my boots tapping a steady rhythm. I didn't lower my gaze. I didn't flinch. I found a seat in the far corner where the crowd was thinnest and pulled out a chair quietly. Behind me, I heard the whispers, "What's she doing here?" "Thinks that uniform entitles her to a piece of the pie," a man I didn't recognize muttered. "They say she's a general, but what kind of general never shows her face?" I exhaled softly through my nose, hands resting on my thighs, fingers curling instinctively into parade rest. Stay steady. Don't react. I've been interrogated by foreign counterintelligence. I've seen comrades fall beside me in an IED blast. I got word of my mother's death while commanding a mission in an Iraqi desert, and kept leading. I've endured worse than whispers. But even so, the sting of being rejected by my own family, that's a hurt you never get used to. I was his eldest daughter, General Walter Hayes's daughter, but I was never the one he spoke of. My mother was his first wife, divorced after just 4 years. I still remember him packing his suitcase, leaving our small house in Columbus, without a backward glance. My mother never spoke ill of him, but her eyes told me enough he wasn't coming back. I grew up with my grandmother. No father at my graduation. No letters of congratulations when I got into West Point. No one at my promotion to general. Instead, there were silent calls from unknown numbers, thick envelopes with no return address, and fleeting meetings at roadside diners, as if he was afraid someone might know he had a daughter like me. The only person who acknowledged me that day was Mr. Richards, my father's lawyer. He stood when I entered, gave a slight nod, and said nothing more. I'd met him a few times over the years at funerals, and once, when he visited my base to deliver a private document from Mr. Hayes. I sat and waited, silent, unmoving. My eyes fixed on a portrait on the wall, my father in a gray suit holding a book. No uniform, no medals, no trace of the soldier who'd fought in 3 wars. A father, kind, looking, but distant. The will reading began. Mr. Richards opened a folder and spoke clearly. The last will and testament of Walter Hayes, duly signed and notarized on June 2nd of last year. I will read the beneficiaries in order. I didn't move, just sat. To Mark Hayes, the Napa Valley estate and 2 vintage cars. To Emily Hayes, all shares in Foresight Capital. To Mrs. Linda Hayes, full ownership of all jewelry, antiques, and fine art. A long, precise list. Bank accounts, properties, investments. My name wasn't mentioned. Not a word. Not a line. I looked away, hands clenching under the table so no one would see. Emily let out a soft laugh, whispering to Mark, poor thing. All those years in the army, and she gets nothing. Mark smirked, but didn't reply. I didn't come for money or houses. I came for something I couldn't name. Maybe acknowledgement. Maybe an explanation. Or maybe just to be part of his story one last time. Then Mr. Richards paused, closed the folder, looked straight at me. Long, deliberate. The room fell silent. He pulled out a small, weathered brown envelope, like it had been kept for years, and the final provision he said to be opened only after all other matters are settled. He opened the envelope and drew out a handwritten note. No typing. No notary. His eyes didn't leave me. Then he read to Major General Hayes, with respect. Your portion will be presented in the 3rd step. The room froze. Those words hit the warm, suspicious air like a gunshot. Major General Hayes, someone gasped behind me. Emily shot up. Wait, what, she's a Hayes too. Who is she to this family? Mark frowned. Linda's jaw dropped. I said nothing. I didn't need to. I just looked at Mr. Richards. He nodded. I'd been ready to walk out. I didn't need anything from these people. But those 5 words to Major General Hayes with respect were something I'd never heard from him in my entire life. I stayed. Back straight. Eyes forward. And I knew. I was about to have a long overdue conversation with the man who'd left me behind. I never got to say goodbye to my father. But maybe this was the beginning of the first and last time I would. Because what came next wasn't about inheritance. It was about secrets. I'm his only daughter, but the one he mentioned the least. By 12, I'd learned silence was the only thing that made adults leave me alone. Especially when I asked about my father. In a small town like Lexington, Virginia, where everyone knows your family 3 generations back, you don't need to speak to be defined. And Walter Hayes' daughter was a favorite topic for whispers after Sunday church. Her dad left when she was tiny. Her mom was an army nurse, right? Walter's got a second wife now, lives in D.C., never comes back. I learned to walk through those words like a soldier through mud-steady steps, eyes forward. My mother, Lisa, was strong in a way that didn't need shouting or proving. She just stood there and people respected her. An army nurse, she met my father when he was wounded in Panama in the late 80s. They fell in love fast, married in a whirlwind like something out of an old black-and-white movie. But life's no movie, and their marriage lasted just over 3 years. He left after a big fight I never got the details of. I only remember my mother's voice, tearful, but soft. He's not a bad man. He just doesn't know how to stay. From then on, my father became a shadow in my life. Not gone, but always distant, very distant. Every year on my birthday, a package arrived from an unknown address, a book, a monogrammed pen, sometimes an old army patch. Never a letter, never a signature. My mother never asked, and I never spoke up. When I was 15, my mother died of lung cancer. She never smoked. I believe it was from years working near explosives, near death, near the smoke of war. Her death came fast and quiet, just like the way she lived. After her funeral, I stood alone. No relatives, no one from my father's side. I waited. For what I didn't know. Maybe a man in a suit arriving late apologizing profusely, or a soldier with a letter from the front. But no one came. That night, as I packed up my mother's room, the phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. It's your dad. His voice was gruff low, but I knew it instantly. I said nothing. Maybe because my throat closed up, or maybe because I didn't know whether to start with Dad or, who are you? He went on. I heard about your mom. A long pause. I'm sorry. I should have been there. But right now, I can't. I gripped the phone, still silent. He hesitated, then said, If anything happens, find Briggs. Write this down. Briggs. I managed one sentence, who's Briggs? But the line went dead. Briggs. The name stuck in my mind like a code. I thought he might be a distant relative, an old friend of my mom's, or someone in my father's contacts I'd never have access to. I didn't ask again. There were no more calls after that. I made it through high school on my own, then applied to West Point. Not to prove anything. Just, I grew up with a battlefield nurse for a mother, and my head was full of images of people in uniform saving others. That was reason enough. At 25, I was a captain. At 32, I commanded a battalion in Iraq. By 38, I was at the Pentagon, one of the highest-ranking female officers in strategy. In all those years, not one letter. Not one call. Except for those packages every April, my birthday. 2 years ago, I got a Silver Star badge, a prestigious military honor with a note. You earned this. WHWH Walter Hayes. I didn't hate him. I thought I would, but I didn't. Whether he was there or not, I grew up. I had discipline, strength, integrity. Maybe because I had a soldier's blood. Maybe I was more like him than I wanted to admit. But I always carried a strange feeling, like I was a secret that needed hiding. When I got word of his death, not from family, but from a military reporter who'd once interviewed me, I didn't cry. I just nodded and asked, did he mention me at the end? No one knew. When I got the invitation to the will reading, I knew I should have declined. But I went. Not for money. Not for legacy. Because I needed closure for a relationship that never really started. Now, sitting in that room among people who didn't see me as kin beside a portrait of a father I both revered, and barely knew I heard that name again. Briggs. Mr. Richards opened a separate envelope. No assets, no contracts, just a few handwritten lines. If she's here, give her the Briggs file. Her alone. No one else. The Briggs file. I looked at Mr. Richards. He looked back like he'd been waiting for this moment. He slid over a thick, weathered envelope sealed with a military stamp and marked Classified for eyes only. Hayes Jeter. Hayes Jr. That's me. I took the envelope, my hands cold. Briggs's name cut through my memory like a blade reopening an old wound. A mysterious name. An unknown man. A message my father left, unexplained. I never understood what it meant until he was gone and I met the man named Briggs. An older man standing outside Arlington National Cemetery the day I visited my father's grave, waiting for me with eyes that already knew who I was. My name wasn't in the estate's distribution, but it was in the classified addendum. There's a kind of hurt that once you've felt it needs no explanation. It's not like physical pain or a loud argument, it's quieter, deeper, like a chair pulled out from under you, just as you're about to sit. I felt that hurt when my name wasn't in my father's official will. Not a word. Not a line. Not even a period. I was ready to accept it. I was used to it. But then Mr. Richards, the silver-haired lawyer at the head of the table, slowly opened a second briefcase. His hands trembled slightly, age or anticipation, I couldn't tell. There's an addendum, he said, his voice hoarse but formal, honed by decades of law. Not part of the estate, but attached separately by Mr. Hayes, for one person alone. Every eye in the room turned to me. Emily gave a dry laugh. Are you kidding? She's not even in the official family tree. What's this about? Mark slapped the table. No name in the will means no legal inheritance. Richards, you're messing this up, Linda. My father's third wife gripped her wine glass, her voice icy. Walter told me she was just a mistake from the past. This shouldn't be brought up. I said nothing. I just looked at Mr. Richards. Silent. Steadfast. I wasn't expecting anything. Not a house. Not stocks. Not a belated apology. But when the people who share your blood dismiss you with that strange tone, you realize it hurts. Not because I wanted to share, but because I just wanted to be acknowledged as real. Mr. Richards didn't flinch. He calmly pulled out a file sealed in aged yellow parchment, marked in red confidential. Hayes Jr. A small handwritten note below, to be opened only if she's present. The room fell silent. Surprise, irritation, and suspicion clashed in every glance. I stared at my father's signature in the corner of the envelope. For the first time in my life, I saw his handwriting tremble. No longer the cold ink of certificates or the digital signatures in military memos. This was handwritten. Real. Human. Emotional. Keep this to yourself. Open it only when you're strong enough to understand. Briggs will know what to do. 3 short lines. No punctuation. No greeting. No closing. I held the envelope in both hands, light as a feather. But in my heart, it weighed like every battle I'd ever led. Emily stood. She has no right. This is a family meeting. This is a will reading. Mr. Richards replied calmly, I'm following Mr. Hayes's legal instructions precisely. This isn't about assets. This is personal. Mark snapped. We don't agree. Mr. Richards turned to me, Major General Hayes. The decision to proceed is yours. If you don't wish to continue, I'll store it away. I looked around. Every familiar, unfamiliar face judged me. I was used to being judged. As the first female general in a special tactics unit, I'd been doubted for my gender, my appearance, my resolve. But this time the judgment came not from enemies, but from family. I took a deep breath and nodded. Go ahead, Mr. Richards. I'm here. He opened the envelope with a silver letter opener. Each cut sliced through the thick tension in the room. Inside was a handwritten report, 3 pages. The first line about Briggs. About why I hid her. About what I never had the courage to say aloud. My heart slowed. My eyes didn't blink. My ears caught only the rustle of paper and Mr. Richards's steady voice. Briggs wasn't just a comrade. He was the keeper of my secret about my first relationship and the price I paid to advance in the army. The room gasped. I thought I was doing the right thing. But the longer I stayed silent, the more I realized silence is betrayal, too. Emily scoffed. What's he mean? Who's Briggs? An old flame. I clenched my fists, not because she was rude, but because I was about to hear something I'd always wanted to know, and feared knowing. Mr. Richards turned the final page. 1 line. If she finds Briggs, she'll understand why I never dared call myself her father. No one spoke. No one moved. I sat a strange mix of loss and anticipation rising within me. Briggs. That name returned like a forgotten whisper from years past. The mysterious man my father mentioned in his one call to me. Someone I'd never met, but who seemed to know me already. I turned to Mr. Richards. Do you know where Briggs is? He looked at me for a long moment, then said, I don't, but someone's been waiting for you since early this morning, outside the gates of Arlington Cemetery. He said he'll talk when you're ready. I shivered. Not from fear, but from the feeling that everything had been orchestrated long ago, like I'd just stepped into a game where the first move was decided 15 years earlier. If you've ever had someone in your family you never fully understood, if you've ever wished for a belated apology, a hidden acknowledgement, stay with me. Because I was about to meet the man my father chose to hold the rest of the truth. I stood still holding the old envelope and walked toward the man waiting at the cemetery. He turned to face me, and before I could speak, he said, Finally, you're here. The man stood by my mother's grave on the anniversary of her death and called me by my exact rank. Arlington National Cemetery has never felt foreign to me. I've attended countless funerals here, pinned medals on comrades' caskets, stood at attention as taps played after the rifle salute. But that morning I wasn't there as an officer. I was there as a daughter. A quiet daughter standing before the white headstone bearing my mother's name. Lisa Hayes, Army nurse, Walter Hayes' first wife. Born 1961, died 2003. Just a few lines, but they held my entire childhood. I knelt, placing a bouquet of white daisies on the dew-damp grass. A gentle morning breeze brushed my cheek like my mother's hand on my head when I was small. I told myself I wouldn't cry. I'd promised her that. But my heart tightened as my fingers touched the cold stone. General Hayes. I startled. Not because the voice was so close, but because of how he addressed me. Full, precise, formal. I turned. An older man stood a few steps away. Silver hair, a veteran's cap, a worn military jacket standing straight as if his spine were steel. His eyes were slightly cloudy age, but sharp as ever. "Briggs?" I asked. He nodded. I'd imagined he'd be older, frailer, maybe confused, like the men I'd met in military nursing homes. But Briggs was different. Something in his stance, his nod, his silence, made me feel like the younger one in this conversation. "I knew your father," he said, no preamble. "Better than anyone still alive." I tightened my grip. "I'm guessing you also know why I'm here." Briggs looked at my mother's grave, then back at me. "Because he owes you the truth, and I'm the one he chose to tell it." We left the cemetery, walking slowly along the white stone path. He invited me to a small coffee shop near the main gate, a place where veterans gathered. Inside the walls were lined with patches, flags, photos of units from World War II to Afghanistan. No one asked my name, but their eyes seemed to recognize my uniform and respect it. Briggs ordered black coffee. So did I. "Do you know why your father never mentioned you to the others?" he asked, not looking at me. "I figured he was ashamed," I said, shrugging. "No," Briggs replied. "He was afraid." I frowned. "Afraid," I repeated. He was Colonel Hayes, led multiple campaigns, earned the Distinguished Service Medal. Afraid of what Briggs set his cup down. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was steady. Afraid of losing everything. His career, his promotions, his reputation, just because of an illegitimate kid like me. He shook his head. "You weren't illegitimate. You were the result of a real love, but at the wrong time." I fell silent. Briggs pulled a small oilcloth bundle from his jacket. I thought it might be a memento, a photo, a patch, but when he unwrapped it and placed it on the table, I froze. It was a small, weathered black metal box etched with the U.S. Army seal. In the center, a 5-pointed star, the Special Forces emblem, and below, carved by hand, Hayes' legacy, for eyes only. "I don't have the right to keep it anymore," Briggs said. "It's yours." I gave a dry laugh. "What about the part where there's no money, just a mission?" "Is that what you're about to tell me?" Briggs looked me in the eye. Not my words, his. I opened the box. No money, no classified files. Just a stack of handwritten letters tied with red string. A Special Forces patch, the kind never sold publicly. And an old photo, my father, my mother, and me, not yet two, perched on his shoulders. I didn't remember that photo. Maybe my mother hid it. Maybe he'd kept it for 30 years. I touched it with my fingertips, afraid to tear the past. Briggs spoke softly, like telling a young soldier a story during a night watch. "Your father didn't not love you. He just didn't have the courage to love you the right way." I don't know why, but my throat tightened. And what surprised me was that my tears weren't from anger. They were from pity. Have you ever felt that realizing the person you thought never needed you actually kept your image close but couldn't show it? If you've ever had a parent who wasn't fully there, but later found proof they watched you even silently, let me know in a comment. Because maybe we're not as alone as we think. I closed the box, clutching it to my chest. "What do I do with this?" I asked. Briggs stood. For the first time, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're a general. You know how to uphold honor. This box isn't for hiding. It's for opening a door he never got to." I nodded. No promises, no commitments. But I knew. I'd do it. We left the shop. The sun was high. The autumn breeze gentle. Briggs shook my hand like an old comrade. His eyes seemed to say, don't let his past die meaninglessly. That night I went home, spread the letters on my table, and started reading. But in the third letter, I saw a name I never expected, Emily, and beside it a warning, in my father's handwriting. I never thought I'd be the one to reopen a past both my father and the Army buried. That evening, after Briggs left, I set the metal box on my desk in my small Alexandria apartment. I turned on the desk lamp, drew the curtains tight. It was just me, and memories never told. I slipped on thin cloth gloves and opened the box again. The letters I'd read earlier were neatly stacked aside. At the bottom was a thick file sealed with red string and a Department of Defense wax stamp. The cover read, Operation Resonance Classification. Top secret, authorized personnel only, and at the bottom, I held my breath. ID access, Hayes Jr. Fingerprint required. I froze. Next to the file was an old fingerprint scanner, the kind that reads your index finger to unlock. I pulled off my glove, pressed my finger to the cold metal. Matching fingerprint. The screen flashed green access granted. That access granted echoed in my head like a confession. The file opened with a faint creak of paper. And as I turned the first page, old memories crashed over me like waves. Operation Resonance, 2003, Afghanistan, early war phase. I remembered that year. I was just starting high school. My mother went quiet, watching the news, and I didn't understand why she'd suddenly turn off the TV. I didn't know my father was part of a classified operation, one the government never acknowledged, one the press never touched. The file held maps of the Shahi Kot Valley Special Forces team. Names, movement schedules, satellite photos, and a handwritten report in blue ink, signed by my father, Colgerd Walter Hayes. I read each line like finding a lost relative's diary after a tragedy. If you're reading this, I didn't make it out of Shahi Kot. We lost 3 men in last night's raid. My mistake. I thought we had time. I underestimated their strength and the terrain. I have no excuses. If I don't come back, tell her I'm sorry for not being the father she deserved. Her name is... I stopped there. A line was scratched out. The ink, smudged water, or trembling hands, I couldn't tell. But I knew. That was where he meant to write my name. I leaned back, the file open before me. My heart was heavy. I'd thought he chose his career over me. But now, reading words written when he thought he wouldn't survive, I realized he wanted to say my name. He just didn't dare. Or didn't have time. I brought the file back to the will reading the next morning. The room was the same crowded, whispering, skeptical eyes. Emily crossed her arms. Mark glanced at me, then at the lawyer with a cold smile. She thinks she can make up anything, because she's in uniform, he said, not bothering to lower his voice. Linda set her teacup down, adjusted her blouse, and said softly, We respect your service, dear. But this is about inheritance, not a battlefield. I didn't respond. I pulled from my pocket a copy of my Silver Star citation signed by the president, stamped by the Pentagon. With it, a scan of my father's letter in handwriting they'd all seen before. I placed them on the table. Said nothing. A few eyes flicked over, then looked down. No one spoke. I looked at Mr. Richards and nodded slightly. This isn't to prove I have a claim, I said slowly. I didn't come to take. I came to settle a debt. Mr. Richards looked up, his eyes misting. I think he understood. He was the last one there who remembered my father as a soldier, not just a man with 3 wives and 2 legitimate kids. We all have someone who's let us down, don't we? Someone who wasn't there when we needed them most. But if one day you found a clue, a letter, an object, a message that they'd thought of you regretted, didn't know how to show it, what would you do? If you've ever felt that, even once, leave a comment. Because this story isn't just mine. I left the meeting with my head high. No one stopped me. I carried nothing but the metal box and a clear mission to uncover everything about Briggs' Operation Resonance and why my father trusted me, not anyone else, with this. That night, I opened the file again. This time, I found a yellowed military ID, my father's real name scratched out, replaced with a code name, General Hayes doesn't exist. All my life, I called him Dad, but the records called him General Hayes. There's something strange about realizing the name you've used your whole life might not be real. I always thought if there was one constant in my life, it was what I called my father Dad. Even if he wasn't there, even if those calls were just in my head or in letters, I never sent Dad carried a warmth and a sting. But that night, when I flipped over his old military ID, my heart stopped for a second. Beneath the bold print of Colgerd Walter Hayes, a thin layer of paper peeled away, revealing the real name underneath Jonathan R. Bishop. I frowned, read it twice, then 3 times. His real name was Jonathan Bishop, not Walter Hayes. I sat still for minutes holding the card. No longer a soldier analyzing documents, just a daughter realizing. I might never have truly known the man who gave me life. Have you ever felt that, when someone you thought you knew, even through their absence, turns out to have another identity? Another life? If you've ever uncovered something that made you rethink every memory you had, share it in a comment. Because I believe everyone has a secret waiting to be uncovered, something that makes you say, "So I never really knew them." I carefully reviewed the file. Military records, discharge papers, Pentagon thank you letters all listed, Kohler's Walter Hayes with an encrypted service number, but in one letter from command a small note, alias active per assignment Operation Resonance. Subject ID Bishop Jonathan R., alias. Code name. Hayes was his cover. I flipped back to his letter from the operation. His handwriting was heavier than usual, like he'd gripped the pen so tightly it scored the paper. If you're reading this, Briggs kept his word. I was a soldier, a husband, a father, but also a traitor to all three just to keep a bigger secret. For the first time I felt pity for him. Not the weak kind, but a cold understanding. I'd thought he avoided me out of shame, that I was the inconvenient child. But now I saw he wasn't just Duo B fatherhood he was hiding from himself. Another document marked eyes only was a CIA memo about officers given new identities after the operation. In the list, Bishop Jonathan R., assigned identity Hayes Walter. So after the failed Afghanistan mission, my father was given a new identity, became Walter Hayes, consultant, civilian, the man in Maryland with 3 wives and 2 legitimate kids. No one knew he'd led one of the most covert operations of the early 21st century. And no one knew he had me. That night, I stood before my mirror, looking at my uniform, every stitch, every medal, and asked myself, who am I, the daughter of Jonathan Bishop Walter Hayes? Or just a man who never dared be himself? All my life, I'd fought for a name, to prove I was worthy, to not be forgotten. But what if that name was just a shell? I thought of my mother. She called him Walter. But did she know he was Jonathan? Or was she just part of the cover too? I remembered her eyes whenever I asked about him. They held something back. Maybe she knew. But she chose silence. I called Briggs. I found his real name, I said. He paused, then replied softly, "And are you ready to hear the rest?" I swallowed. I think so. Briggs told me to come by the next morning. He had something I needed to see. Something that, in his words, will change how you see him forever. Before hanging up, he said, "You weren't abandoned. You were what he tried to hold on to the only way he knew how, by becoming someone else. If you've ever carried the last name of someone who never called you their child, if you've ever felt like the exception in your own family, leave a sign, a comment, an emoji, a word. Let me know I'm not the only one who's quietly wondered, who am I, if my roots are a secret I spent the night reading every document." In a corner of the file, I found an unopened letter. No sender, just handwriting for my daughter if she finds my real name. I wasn't ready to open it. I wanted to hold on to it, for when I was ready to hear one final truth, not from someone else, but from him. The next morning I went to Briggs's house as promised. His small wooden cabin sat tucked among pines in West Virginia, a 3-hour drive from the city. No fence, no doorbell, just a wooden sign out front. Freedom is not free. I knocked 3 times. No answer. I called out. Silence. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open. Inside it was so quiet, I could hear the wind through the window cracks. The air smelled of old tobacco mint tea and pine, a mix of comfort and loss. On the kitchen table, a warm cup of coffee sat beside a thick envelope and a black and white photo. I picked up the photo. It showed a group of soldiers, about 10, standing before a UH-60 helicopter. All in worn uniforms, sun-baked faces, tough, but bonded in their eyes. In the bottom right corner, faded handwriting Briggs, Bishop, and an unnamed child. Bishop, my father, Jonathan Bishop, was third from the left. Briggs stood beside him, hand on his shoulder. And between them, a little girl, maybe 2 or 3. Curly hair, oversized shirt, looking up at the photographer, not the camera. It was me. I sat down, heart pounding, gripping the photo like it might vanish. Emotions swirled, shock, pain, and an unnameable tenderness. He'd taken me with him. He'd let me be part of his life, if only for a moment before everything changed. Just then the back door opened. Briggs walked in carrying firewood. His eyes lit with surprise when he saw me holding the photo, then softened into a slight smile. "You're on time." "I knew you would be," he said as if my arrival was a given. "Is this me in the photo?" I asked. He nodded. "That was the last day your father was on the front lines." 2 days later, he was badly wounded in an ambush. That was the last time he was Jonathan Bishop. I set the photo down my throat tight. Why did he bring me? That's no place for a kid. Briggs sat across from me. He took off his cap, set it on the table, hands clasped. "Because you were the only thing keeping him sane." He paused, then continued. "When your mother got sick, he tried to get back to the States. But the mission was too sensitive. They wouldn't let him. You were sent to a temporary base listed as a special dependent. He carried you along, hid that you were his daughter." I barely breathed. "Then what?" "After the ambush, he was hit bad chest and leg, evacuated fast. The CIA stepped in, offered to erase his identity to protect the network. And he agreed. New name, new file, new life." Briggs looked at me, his eyes unbearably sad. "But he had one condition. No one could touch you." I gripped my sleeve. "He said he loved me, but never came back," I said softly. Briggs shook his head. "Not that he didn't. He couldn't. If he showed himself, you'd have been watched. Pulled into a game even he couldn't control." I looked down. The pieces in my mind started clicking together. His absence, the cut-off calls, the nameless gifts. It wasn't because he didn't want to be my father. It was because he chose to be my shield. "I hated him," I whispered. "Thought I was the one left behind." Briggs pulled a letter from a drawer. "You need to read this." I opened it. The paper was yellowed, but the ink clear. "Briggs, if I don't make it, tell her I chose to live in the dark, not out of cowardice. But because if the light hit me, she'd burn first. I don't need her forgiveness. Just for her to live, fully as strong as her mother wanted." I couldn't hold back the tears. Not for the letter, but for Briggs's gentle voice beside me. "He didn't abandon you. He gave up his identity to keep you out of the war." Those words cut deeper than anything I'd ever heard. I'd carried anger for 2 decades, and now all that remained was pity. Have you ever blamed a loved one for not being there? Then realized they quietly did everything so you could live in peace. If you've ever been like me, angry at someone's silence only to learn it was to protect you, leave a comment, because some loves exist only in silence. I stood and hugged Briggs. He stiffened for a moment, then patted my back like soldiers do before a mission. "Anything else you want to know?" he asked. I nodded, pulling out the unopened letter, the one marked, "For my daughter if she finds my real name." I tore the seal. The first line stopped me cold. "You're the only one chosen." In the entire will, I was the only one given the power to decide the legacy's fate. Because I was the only one who understood the cost of war. Some words aren't written to make you smile. They're written to make you still. That letter tucked in the file Briggs gave me bore the marks of time, crumpled edges, slanted handwriting, ink, smudged as if written in less than perfect conditions. Or in a moment of emotion the writer couldn't steady. I opened it. The paper was thin, but heavier than my dress uniform on campaign days. "You're the only one chosen. Not because of blood, but because only you understand what the rest of our family never did, the cost of war, and the cost of silence." I had to read it 3 times to believe my father wrote those words. Not "my dear daughter," not "I'm sorry for the years apart," but an acknowledgement, plain, unflinching, raw, to the point of pain. The kind of love only someone who's lived through loss, and carried it quietly, could write. Beneath the letter was a lengthy document, the establishment of the Warriors' Silence Fund. I skimmed the opening my father, as Walter Hayes had quietly set it up in his final 5 years. Purpose to support unsung veterans, those who got no recognition, no mental or material support after leaving service. Hundreds of names, mostly veterans with severe PTSD, living off the grid, many lost to the VA system. The fund's value, $25 million, liquidated from his personal investments. And the key part, underlined by hand, only one person has full authority to manage and distribute the fund, Hayes Jr. No board, no oversight, no negotiation. I leaned back, heart racing. Me, the one left out of the estate. The one not mentioned at the first reading. The one who thought she was a shadow unworthy. I was the only one entrusted with his true mission. My father didn't leave me houses, cars, or paintings. He left me the best part of his life, the part he couldn't live authentically while serving. A chance to make amends not for personal wrongs, but for the gap between those who served and a society that forgot them. I flipped back to the letter. If you're reading this, I'm gone. But you're still here, and you're the one part of my life I couldn't erase, couldn't rename, couldn't deny. I chose the wrong way to live, but I hope you choose the right way to end it. I closed my eyes, not to cry, but because for the first time I felt he trusted me, not as a daughter, but as a comrade. I didn't call the lawyer. I didn't tell the family. Instead, I went straight to a veterans nonprofit I'd quietly supported before. I laid out the Warrior Silence Fund. I stated the goal. No one should stay silent after war. No one's silence should kill them like it killed part of my father. They listened. They agreed to provide technical and logistical support. A week later, I stood before a camera. For the first time, not as a general, but as a soldier's daughter. I told the story. No names, no addresses, but real enough for anyone who's been there to feel it. And I said I thought I was the one rejected. But it turns out, I was the one he trusted most. Have you ever had someone in your life who didn't give you tangible things, but left you a mission, a reason to keep going? If you're living with an unanswered question, or carrying a duty no one asked you to take but you do, because you know it's right, leave a comment. We're living for each other, and for those who stayed silent their whole lives. I got a letter from the Pentagon asking if I'd speak at a memorial for unsung veterans. I didn't decline, but I had one condition: no one mentions my name. This isn't about honoring one person. It's about honoring those who were never named. Briggs met me that afternoon back in his old kitchen. He asked, "You ready?" I nodded, but he didn't smile. He just set a small box on the table. Inside was an old military ID, my mother's, and my father's final handwritten note. She was the only one brave enough to keep you when I was ready to leave you both. I always thought my mother was the one abandoned, but it turns out she was the one who chose to let him go, to keep me. In my father's file, I found a photo of a woman holding me, but she wasn't my real mother. I always believed I knew my mother's face. It was the one constant I carried through battlefields and lonely nights in my quiet apartment. I thought her image was my anchor when everything else was unexplainable. Until I opened the final file in the metal box Briggs gave me. Among the worn papers, a small photo slipped out, pressed between 2 pages of military medical records. No caption, no frame, just a moment, a woman holding me as a child, maybe 4 or 5. Her dark hair was tied back, her army nurse uniform crisp. Her face looked down at me gentle as late-day sunlight. And me, the child in the photo, leaned into her fast-asleep tiny arms around her neck like it was the safest place in the world. But she wasn't my mother. I knew that. She wasn't Lisa Hayes, the woman who gave birth to me. The first feeling wasn't confusion. It was betrayal. I gripped the photo, my heart catching. Who was she? Why was she holding me? Why did my father, a man who hid everything, keep this photo tucked away more carefully than his classified operation files? I couldn't escape the cruelest question: was the woman I called my mother all these years not the one who raised me? I called Briggs. "Is there a part missing from the file you gave me?" He was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "I'm guessing you saw the photo." I clutched the phone. Who is she? His voice softened like a father about to say something he knew would hurt his child. Her name was Grace, Lieutenant Grace Thompson, Army nurse, the only survivor of the medical team in Operation Resonance. And I asked faintly, "And she was the one who raised you for 2 years after your mother Lisa passed?" I stood frozen. 2 years. I vaguely remembered after my mother's funeral living with a distant relative in a small town. I recalled simple dinners, a faint, perfumed dreams soothed by a cool, steady hand. I never knew her name, never dared ask, because I thought, if I didn't call her Mom, no one else had the right to fill that role in my memories, but she was there, in flesh and blood. Did my father ever love her? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Briggs didn't answer right away. I don't think it was love like in the old stories. Not passion, not romance, but gratitude, a bond between two people who survived losses no one wants to talk about. I sat down slowly. Part of me broke, but strangely, part of me felt healed. For years, I thought my father didn't return because he chose to leave. But now I knew he let someone else take his place, not to shirk duty, but to ensure I lived. Not in his world, not in war, but in the arms of someone who knew how to preserve life, even in the harshest moments. I tracked down old military records and contacted veteran hospitals. After 2 weeks, I found Grace's whereabouts, a veterans' nursing home in Pennsylvania. She was frail, her memory spotty, but when I walked into her room holding that old photo, her eyes lit with something strange, recognition without words. I knelt beside her, took her thin hand, the one that had once held me fed. Me walked me to school in those early days after my mother's death. I said nothing, just rested my head on her hand, tears falling silently. Have you ever been grateful for someone not bound to you by blood, but who quietly carried you through a broken time? Someone who didn't have to love you, but chose to in the quietest way. If you've had someone like that, or just wished you did, leave a comment. Because love doesn't always carry the name mother or father. Sometimes love is a warm meal, a steady arm, a photo never hung on the wall. I left the nursing home in the late afternoon. A light rain fell. I didn't feel cold. I felt like I'd laid the first solid brick in the shaky house of my memories. I returned to Arlington Cemetery, stood before my father's grave. I didn't salute, didn't stand at attention. I just stood there, quiet, placed a penny on his headstone the way soldiers say I was here. I remember you, and whispered, I understand. I turned to leave, but at the cemetery gate someone handed me a letter, the final one in my father's handwriting, with a note. If you've forgiven, this is the last thing I want you to know. I left the will reading with empty hands, but my head held high. That morning, the D.C. sky was a soft gray. Not cold, not harsh, just enough to calm my heart more than usual. I walked out of the final meeting with my father's lawyer, carrying nothing but a signed stack of papers, a thin folder, and a strange sense of relief. I'd refused the last assets offered to me, a Vermont cabin, a vintage Cadillac, a share of the family company stock. I thanked them, politely, gently, then crossed my name off the list. Are you sure Mr. Richards asked for the third time, his voice still respectful? I nodded. I didn't come to take anything. I came to finish what my father couldn't while he was alive. I signed the final transfer for the Warriors' Silence Fund, but this time I asked for a name change. I wanted the fund to honor not just a man who lived 2 identities. I wanted it to stand for 2 people, one who fought and sacrificed his name to protect, and one who stayed preserving the memory of those forgotten. The new name, the Briggs, Hayes Foundation. I sent a request to redesign the logo, a circle with 2 clasped hands, one in a military glove, one bare. Below the motto, they don't need their names known, just remembered. I sent handwritten letters to every family member, not emails, not through intermediaries. I wrote each word addressed to each person who sat with me at that first will reading. I didn't apologize. I didn't blame. I just wrote, I didn't come to fight for a share. I came to honor a soldier's promise made before he was gone. You may not need to understand, but if one day your kids ask, why didn't she take anything? Tell them because she already had enough with the truth. I got no replies. Didn't expect any. I know some family cracks can't be mended with words, But I also know silence isn't always running away. Sometimes it's the only way people learn to grow from their own wounds. Have you ever forgiven someone, not because they apologized, but because you wanted to be free? If you have, if you've let go of something not out of weakness, but because you were strong enough to not need it anymore, leave a comment. Let me know you've stood at the crossroads of anger and understanding, and chose to walk forward without stones weighing down your heart. I went back to my old military base, not to serve, to retire properly. I submitted my honorable discharge after nearly 25 years in the Army. My comrades asked why. I just said I think it's time I lived to tell the story. I'm no longer General Hayes, no longer need to walk into rooms that make people stand for my rank. I'm a storyteller now, and I'll tell not of victories, but of silences. On my small desk, where I'm writing these memories, is a wooden box. Inside are 3 things: a piece of my father's uniform worn at the shoulders, still faintly smelling of gunpowder. A letter from my mother, just 1 line. Don't let the world make you forget where home is. And a small note tucked in my breast pocket from my father in his scrawled handwriting. When you forgive, you can tell the truth without a trembling hand. I once thought I was the outsider. A name not carved on the family stone, a shadow at the edge of the will reading. But it turns out I was chosen to tell the story not for my father, but for those who lived like him, unnamed, unable to hold their children in daylight, unacknowledged, as father's soldiers, or men who once existed. The last day I stood at my father's grave, I didn't wear my uniform. I wore civilian clothes, old shoes, hair tied back, no makeup. I didn't salute, didn't stand at attention, didn't give a speech. I just placed a small paper on his headstone. No words, just my fingerprint, to let him know I was here. I don't blame him, and I remember him not as a colonel, not as a figure hidden in classified files, but as a man who learned to love his daughter the only way he knew, by disappearing, so I could exist. My story ends here, but the journey to tell the truth is just beginning, because out there I know there are others like me searching for an answer, a line never written, a reason to let go of anger without losing pride. If you're one of them, leave a sign you've passed through this story. You don't need to tell it all. Just 1 word. Understood, and if someone needs to hear it, I'll tell it. With all the forgiveness I've learned with the voice of a daughter, a soldier, and someone who knows the value of breaking silence at the right time.